Exodus chapter 1, starting at verse 8, reading through chapter 2, verse 3, and this is what it says. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply in the event of war, and they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land." So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh's storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. The Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks and all kinds of labor in the field, all the labors which they rigorously imposed on them. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah. And he said, "When you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live." But the midwives feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and let the boys live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get to them." So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. Because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive." Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. So we're taking, like I said, another small break from our series in the Gospel of Luke this morning for the sake of Mother's Day. Now this passage is one we would have rolled right into when we finished the book of Genesis, and I really considered that. I just didn't know how long I could hold your attention with Old Testament stories like that, so we moved to something in the New Testament. I try and mix it up and keep things palatable for you, but really consider just rolling right on into the book of Exodus, and it just seemed like such a sequence and a series that would just be so neat to do. It felt like the natural flow of the story from the death of Joseph and the children of Israel coming into slavery in Egypt. And then we would fast forward 400 years. And I think of how long, at 400 years they were in slavery there. You think how long that is. That is like twice the amount of time that our nation has even been a nation. 400 years is a long time. And as you fast forward through all that time, you would come in onto this little scene here to a woman having a baby. And I thought of that, and I thought, that is so much like just the gospel accounts, isn't it? Through all that time of silence and waiting. And then after the Old Testament, there's a 400-year period of silence. And then we zoom in on a woman having a baby. Her name was Mary. Here we're doing the same thing. After 400 years, we zoom in on this woman having a baby who would become one of the most influential people who has ever been in the world, one of the greatest prophets of God ever, a baby who would lead the children of Israel out of slavery after that 400 years in bondage in Israel, would give us the 10 Commandments, would be over the construction of the tabernacle of God, where God would put his presence, and actually people could see the Shekinah glory over that tabernacle where the Holy of Holies was. This man was responsible for all that, and he would write the first 5 books of the Bible. And he would also write one of the Psalms. Did you know that Moses wrote one of the Psalms? The oldest psalm in the book of Psalms is Psalm 90, and it was written by Moses. Absolutely. All of this started with a woman having a baby in adverse conditions. It all started with this one little phrase in verse 1 there of chapter 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. That's their tribe. They were both from the tribe of Levi. And the story we just read is really this beautiful and fascinating story. We don't even have time to cover everything that happened in this story. I kind of let the story give its own background here for you. But we usually look at this just from seeing the perspective of Moses' birth and everything that's about to happen. But this little part we read here, I really want to focus your attention on here, is really about a woman. These few verses we read at the start of chapter 2 aren't as much about Moses as they are about his mother. It's true. If I asked you her name, how many of you could tell me her name? What is her name? I see a couple, mostly family members, saying it. Yeah, not very well-known name, is it? Her name was Jochebed. Her name's only given in the Bible twice, and those are both in some of the lineage verses. You know, we call those the begats because so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so. And so she's mentioned in a couple of the begats. But you think about this, how many times are women even mentioned in the begats? And she's mentioned twice. Jochebed. Because she's quite the hero, or quite the heroine, we should probably say, because she was a woman. She's only mentioned twice. Her name was Jochebed, and she was mentioned because she was Moses' mother. I believe, as Moses wrote this little portion, because remember, he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, I believe as he wrote this little portion, he must have paused and really focused on her for what she did. His mom. He's like, my mom is getting 3 verses out of this Bible, and I am going to tell you what my mom did for me. That's what those verses are. So keep your finger here, though, in Exodus. I want to turn over to another kind of parallel passage. Turn back to the book of Hebrews while you keep your finger there in Exodus chapter 2. Turn to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, and while you're turning, we'll do a little review there. The book of Hebrews was written to the Hebrew Christians, the Jewish Christians, after Jesus had come, and they were Christians who had been kicked out of their homes and were being persecuted for not only being Jews, but also being Christians. They had the double whammy going on against them, and that's who the book of Hebrews was written to. The book was given to help them find their foundation in Jesus Christ, as the fulfillment of everything they had believed as Jews, and to give them the hope of a future now that they had found Jesus. It's a powerful book. It's not an easy book to read, but that is what the book of Hebrews is. Now we're turning to the 11th chapter, and you can probably tell me this, that the 11th chapter of Hebrews has a special name. What is it? It's the what chapter? Faith chapter, yes. I heard it out there a few times. The faith chapter. Hebrews 11 talks to us about faith. It starts out with the words, now faith is, right? And then it goes on to talk to us about what faith is. It is filled with brief accounts of the heroes of the faith all the way back to creation. All the people, it's like we can look back on all these people and thank them and thank God for what they did to bring us the gospel that we have today. And verse 23, where I had you turn, brings to light this episode from Exodus that we were reading this morning. And verse 23 says this, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. It's a powerful verse. They were not afraid of the king's edict. We begin all these verses, basically, as you go through the chapter, by faith this happened, by faith that happened. What I loved when I was studying this, I found in the original, it just starts out with the word faith, and it's really kind of a cool application. It would just say, if we had done it in a transliteration, it just said faith, because faith, and then this happened. And so in these verses, it would have started out and said faith. Moses was born because his parents saw he was no ordinary child and hid him for 3 months. That's one of the definitions of faith, or one of the examples of faith that it gives us. The fact that it is mentioned in Hebrews 11 means that it is one of the pinnacle events of human history leading up to God fulfilling his promise. Because it's in that chapter, this one little verse. That means it's kind of a big deal what happened in Egypt that day, at that time. The writer of Hebrews, I noticed as I was looking at this, gives credit for this heroic act of the faith to Moses' parents and says, they did this. But I want you to really see this, that as Moses penned it, and you flip back for a moment there to Exodus chapter 2, as Moses penned it, he penned it a little bit different. When he wrote about it, being his own life story, look at it and tell me, to whom does he give the credit for this? His mother, exactly. Where Hebrews says they did this, when Moses wrote it about his own life story, he said, she did this. That's pretty important. She did this. The woman conceived and bore a son, Moses wrote, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. Even in that culture, how often do they accredit the woman with doing something important? Yeah, exactly. It wasn't that kind of a society, was it? And Moses wanted to be sure. Mom did this. She took care of this. Now, I expect that he, and remember his father's name? We will get back and do Exodus someday. Amram and Jochebed, his father's name was Amram. I am sure that Amram went along with it, and that is why the writer of the Hebrews says they, but Moses records his own personal life story, and when he does, he puts the emphasis and the effort into her hands, his mother. He wanted everyone to understand that it was his mother who had done this for him. And in these verses, in these very few verses, the woman shows us some vital things about being a mother that I want to share with you on this Mother's Day. She gives us this godly example, and I want us to look at her and some of the things she did. Number one, she shows us the immense influence that a mother has on a child. You probably, as a mother, have more influence on a child than anyone else in the world, even dad. I mean, we kind of get second place, you know. There's different style of leadership, different things we each bring to the table, but mothers have so much influence on their children. Dads, like I said, we have an influence too, but the Bible is full of stories of mothers who molded and shaped and nurtured their children to live for the Lord, even when their fathers didn't. Can you think of any? Throw out any examples? How about Hannah? Right? Prophet Samuel's mother. Think in the New Testament. Any examples there? Maybe out of the book of Timothy? Timothy's mom, there we go. And his grandmother, right? Because Timothy, we know, his father wasn't even a believer. He was a Gentile. His mother was a Jew, and she raised him to love the Lord. And then he has 2 books in the Bible named after him. She did all right. She did all right. Well, hopefully you kept your finger in Hebrews 11 here when you flipped back, and you can keep them in there for flipping back and forth, because I want you to look with me at Hebrews 11, 24 through 27, and see the kind of influence that Jochebed had on her son Moses. Hebrews 11, 24 through 27, and this is what it says. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was unseen. This shows us the kind of influence Jochebed had on him. There are a number of notable aspects in these verses. When he grew up, he starts out here, the author says, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He refused it. Now, he was taken out of the Nile. If we had kept reading the story, you'd see the whole thing. And you probably know this story, the story of Moses. He was taken out of the Nile and into the house of Pharaoh the king. Pharaoh's daughter was at the river bathing, and they found him floating there. And she adopted him, took him in to raise him as her own. And you think about it, that put him in line, somewhere in line anyway, to the throne that was the greatest nation in the world at that time. The most powerful household in the world took him in and made him a son. But he refused it. He turned it down. I don't want that. He said, no. It's very much like where Jesus said, deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. Deny yourself. It's the same thing. Refuse yourself this to follow me. And that's what Moses did. Let me ask you this. Think about this. How did Moses know that he was not really the son of Pharaoh's daughter? Exactly. I really doubt that Pharaoh's daughter said, you're not really my son, Moses. I just found you in the river, brought you in, lucky you, And that's not usually how we adopt children, is it? We usually want them to know, I chose you. I brought you into my life. I brought you into my home because I love you, and I chose you, and I love you. So I really doubt that they were saying that. It's not how we talk to them. No, we see in Exodus that when Pharaoh's daughter needed a wet nurse for the baby she found in the basket, God opened the door for Jochebed to be that person. Isn't that amazing how God works? Isn't it? And Moses, she was able to take Moses and raise him when he was little and treat her like her own child until he was weaned. God is so good. I am sure that somehow or other Jochebed was able to pass this truth onto Moses of who he really was. And he could know who his real mother was. And so he chose, it says, to be ill-treated with the children of Israel, to be treated as a slave rather than all the riches that Egypt had to offer. How rich was Egypt? We still drag their stuff around to museums. You look at King Tut's things that were found. There's like more gold in their tombs than there are in our banks. They were incredibly wealthy. The treasures of Egypt. And when when the writer of Hebrews wrote that, he chose all of this he chose to be despised as a slave with the people of God rather than all the treasures of Egypt. That's what he was looking at. Gold, everything. And he said, no. Then there's this interesting phrase. It says, it gives us his reason for doing it. And this is really wild when you think about it. Think about this. It says, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. The reproach of Christ. That was his reason. It wasn't just out of loyalty to his family and his people saying, well, I'm a Hebrew, I should be there with them, so, just because I'm loyal to my people, I'm going to go join them. No, it was because he knew about a promise that there was something better coming and that it was coming in the form of a person. That person was the Messiah. His mother, even though she was the slave taking care of the baby for the princess, taught him about the Messiah. It says Christ here, but you see, this is 1,400 years before Jesus came. That's what's mind-blowing about it. This was 1,400 years before Jesus came, and yet the writer says, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. Well, here's the deal. The word Christ is the Greek word for it, and the word Messiah is the Hebrew word for it. And somehow Moses was taught, most likely by his mother, about the promise of the coming Messiah to deliver their people. And he considered the reproach of the Messiah greater than all the treasures that Egypt had to offer. Who told baby Moses about the Messiah? Mom. She's the one that had access to him. And she told him enough about it that though he was living in the lap of luxury, he was heir to the throne, living in a palace where they had more gold, like I said, in their tombs than we generally do in our banks or in our reserve. And he learned enough about it to when the opportunity came, he said, no. I refuse this, and I choose the Messiah. Think of the faith that Jochebed had built in that little boy, that he could make a choice like that. Look at verse 27, still here in Hebrews 11. It says, by faith he left Egypt. I love this phrase, not fearing the wrath of the king. We saw the same phrase about Jochebed when she hid him, not fearing the wrath of the king. They knew they didn't need to fear him, for it says, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. Isn't that what faith is? How we know what exists that we cannot see, and that's how we believe in God. It's not just blind, it's not just some hope, pray, guess, wonder stuff. We see the evidence, we know it's real, we believe in it, and we know it's true, and he could believe in a God who was unseen to him. And because of that, he had no fear for the king, because he knew that the God he was putting his trust in, even though he couldn't see him, was greater than the king of Egypt, which, as I said, was the greatest kingdom on the earth at that time. The most powerful nation. And he did not fear that king. That is amazing faith. And his mother, a slave woman, was able to instill this in him as a child, so when he needed it, it would be there. And he wouldn't have to fear. That is the kind of influence that the nurturing care of a mother can leave on her child. It wasn't his father, and I'm not saying he was a deadbeat dad or he was against it or anything. It's just that she's the one who had access to this little boy. They probably would have done it together, but she's the one who had access to this little boy. See, God, this is our amazing God. God took the baby that she placed in his hands and put him back in hers. That's our God. Now, I read this part, and as I was going through this, and I'm wondering, I can only wonder where I might be right now with, and what kind of person I might be right now, or who I would have turned out to be without the influence of a godly mother in my life. And I'm so grateful. So number one, she shows us the influence that a mother can have. Number two, she shows us the ability of a mother to see what nobody else might see in her child. See even beyond potential. Back in Exodus chapter 2, looking at verse 2, it says, the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. Now this is a really important phrase because it is carried over into the account in the New Testament in Hebrews there. It said the same thing. It was important enough for the writer of the Hebrews to take up on it and say that the reason was that they saw he was beautiful. And where it says he was beautiful, the word is a word that is used under certain special circumstances throughout the Bible. It doesn't just mean that he had 10 fingers and 10 toes and 2 eyes and everything looked proportional and he was a good-looking baby. It doesn't mean just that. It is used, and I'm quoting here from one of my study tools here, it says, particularly in the context of describing individuals who are favored or chosen by God. She looked at that baby, and what did she think? God has a plan for this child. She could see that there was something special about this boy, and that God had his hand on him. In fact, the same thing is noted in Acts chapter 7, verse 20, when Stephen, one of the first deacons, he was preaching the sermon, the one the Jews killed him for, and they stoned him for it right there and stuff. But as he was preaching, he was going through the history of the Jewish people to show them how Christ came to them. And in Acts chapter 7, verse 20, he mentions this very same thing. He says, it was at that time that Moses was born, and he was lovely in the sight of God, carrying the same thing over. That God's face was smiling on this baby. And God had a plan for him. And she could see it. Lovely in the sight of God. There was something special about this boy, and she could see it immediately. Perhaps that was her reason for instilling in this boy all the truths about the Messiah and his coming kingdom and the promise that was given in the garden and the promise of a Redeemer, because she instilled all that in him. She saw something special, and she equipped him for that purpose. That's the job. Equipping children for the purposes of God. So number 3, she shows us that a mother is willing to take chances and risk her own well-being and sometimes even her life to see her child become all that God has in store for him or her. She'll take risks. Imagine how intense it had to be to hide a newborn baby in a slave's house for 3 months. I doubt they were soundproof accommodations. It was probably a hut of sorts that they were living in and trying to hide a newborn baby for 3 months. Every time he cried, the whole family's lives were in danger. Never knowing if someone's going to rat you out to the authorities because you have a baby boy and you're not supposed to have a baby boy. But when she saw this child and saw that he was lovely in the sight of God, she knew she had to do it. And she took the risk and kept him alive when the king was saying to kill him. She had to risk her life and actually that of her family to keep him alive. And yet, it says she did not fear the king. She feared God more than Pharaoh. And so she did the right thing. And finally, she shows us the faith that it takes to be a godly mother in that kind of world and in this kind of world too. 3 months along, she realized that she could not hide him any longer. Pharaoh had ordered that all these boys be cast into the Nile. And here's an interesting turn of events, because the Nile River is in itself one of the major gods, small g, of the Egyptians. That's why when God sent Moses back, he had him turn the Nile into blood, because they were worshiping this river. It brought them life. And so it was one of their gods. Pharaoh required the Hebrew women to throw their sons into this river, his god, and kill them. Isn't it ironic that the child who escaped that fate would grow up to become a man of God and would come back as God's messenger, and God would take Pharaoh's firstborn? The true God. Turnabout is fair play. That's what happened. And that's what she is ordered to do. He ordered them to throw their babies into the Nile. Well, she didn't quite cast him in. There's a little bit of passive aggressiveness here. She almost obeyed it, but she did it the way that God could use it, because she got a wicker basket and she waterproofed it with pitch, and she placed him gently in it. And it says she placed him among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And then she left. Think of that. How hard did that have to be? How much faith did she have to be to take her son that she had kept for 3 months, put him in this floating basket, and walk away? We know she didn't stay because it says that his older sister, her name, anyone? I was going to say, they better be coming out of the second row here anyway. Miriam. She had her stay there and watch to let her know what was happening. But it kind of reads like this is the thing. I can't stay and watch. I can't see. I got to know. You stay and you come tell me what happens, because I can't watch this. And she left her child in the hands of God on the banks of the Nile River. And think of how many tons of tears she probably shed as she was walking home from the Nile that day, just weeping probably all the way home. She was a woman of faith, but this was her son. We can't separate these things. She's a mother. This is her child. She gave him life. Yes, she had faith, but this was her son. And she had held on as long as she could, but now she had to let him go into God's hands and completely take hers off. That time comes in the life of every mother at some point, doesn't it? There's a day when you see your son or daughter drive off to college, and you hope beyond hope that everything you have done and everything you have taught them is going to stick with them. Their head is going to get filled with all kinds of things at college, and they're going to be taught all these things that go against what you've instilled in them, and you are hoping beyond hope that what you taught is going to stick. Even before then, think of the day. You remember the day when you first let them get on that bus, and they got their backpack as big as them, and they're getting on that bus, and you're taking your hands off, and you're watching them climb those steps to go to a school and learn who knows what from who knows who, especially these days. Today, when so many times teachers are not only do, but are charged to keep secrets from the parents. And I thought, man, life has changed. I remember when my teachers were so happy to call my parents and tell them everything I did wrong in class. Not necessarily the right stuff, but when I did something wrong, they were pretty quick to call, and Mom and Dad were pretty quick to take care of it when I got home, But now they tell them, no, you can't. I know in California it's even a law. You can't tell the parents any of this. It's just like with Pharaoh, when the laws are coming up, and we have these things that are doing that. And we think, what will the other kids do to him or to her? And you come to grips with the fact that you can't be there every moment of every day and control everything that happens in your child's world. And it could be paralyzing. And so you have to, like Jochebed, have what? Faith in God. That what he has begun, he will finish. Parenting is so much easier when you just send them to their room, and you can physically put your arms around them and protect them from whatever they're afraid of. But for Jochebed, that day came way too soon, 3 months in. I bet she prayed night and day for that little boy in tears. And you think of the crocodiles and the snakes and the poisonous insects and the hippos, and even the currents of the river could be hazardous. But she obeyed God, and his hand was on that little basket every moment, and God protected it and placed it in the hands of the daughter of the very man who had ordered his death. Isn't that amazing? Safest place he could find. The palace. And God gave her son back to her. And she had the opportunity to raise him to be the man of God she saw in him when he was born. God honored her faith. God will honor your faith. When you place your child's fate in his hands, he will honor your faith. When you reach the point that there is nothing else you can do but give him over to him, he will honor your faith. You may not get to see it the way she did, but he will honor your faith. She did all of this when everything in the world was telling her to do otherwise. That's why I say she was a rebel mom. Not a rebel mom in the sense that she had a Harley and tats and, she looked like Rosie the Riveter or anything like that. No, not like that, but in the sense that she was going to stand strong against a culture and against laws that pushed her in the wrong directions. And she was not going to go along with it because she knew her God was greater than anything the world could throw at her. Rebelling against the wrong. Rebelling in the sense like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. When Nebuchadnezzar put up this giant idol and said, "You must bow," and they said, "We will not." That's the way she was. When the world would tell her she was less for being a mother, she would stand and say, "No, I will be a mother." When the most powerful man in the world passed sentence on all the babies born to these Hebrews that they should all be killed, she said, "No, not my son." When they were living as slaves and aliens in a land that worshiped and served many false gods, she would teach her son about the one true God. See, we need moms like that today who are willing to stand against the tide of our culture and sometimes even our laws if need be, like this woman did, and ensure that our children have every chance they can to be what God wants them to be. And I can't think of another time in history when our children have faced more opposition to becoming what God has in mind for them than I can today. The way the current is. I think of the pressure that is building in on them and causing anxiety and depression in young children to just explode. And our society's full of it because they're just way too connected to everything that happens. We've talked about this every minute of every day. Even in the night, they are being liked and disliked by people that they may not even know. And I thought about that, and it's like, man, how many times were you older ones like me, liked and disliked as kids? It was when you wrote it on a little slip of paper and you passed it to Sally Sue and said, "Do you like me? Check yes or no." And after she checked no about 4 times, you figured out to quit passing that note. But our kids are getting that from everyone and everywhere. All that matters about you is how many likes you have. Who's going to stand against that? And we didn't know all the stuff going on in the world if it wasn't on the evening news, which we didn't watch because we were kids. Right? Unless you had an assignment the next day, you didn't watch the news. No, you were busy out playing in the streets and drinking out of the garden hose until the street lights came on and you knew it was time to go home. You didn't see the 6 o'clock news. You didn't know everything that was going on in the world that you should be worried about. I thought about there was one screen in our house. And when I was little, it was black and white. And it was in this big fake wood box that didn't move in the living room, and it wasn't a screen in every room that was, and I'm not just getting on screens, I'm just talking about the world and the situation our kids are facing when they're just bombarded by all this stuff all day, and they need someone to stand against that culture and say, "No, you're okay." And God made you a little girl, and that's the way He loves you, and God made you a little boy, and that's the way He loves you. We weren't asked questions about our sexuality. I thought about it and I was like, I don't even know how old I was the first time I used the word sexuality. I was probably 20 or something like that, Instead of teachers hiding things from mom and dads, when we were kids, they were telling us, our parents, what we did. And our kids need help. It's going to be moms. going to be grandmoms. It's going to be dads and uncles and all that too, but it's going to be aunts. But in this particular case, we see this woman standing against the tide and saying, no, not my son. Moms, we need you like never before. Moms who will have the faith in God that this mother did. Our system is fighting and pulling our kids away from us and away from our beliefs and away from our God as hard as it can. The world is crushing in on them, and we need moms who will stand against it and see what God sees in our children and defy anyone and everyone, even the most powerful person in the world, to preserve the life and the hope of our children to grow up and know the Lord. Who will train them to refuse everything the world has to offer for the sake of standing for Christ. Who will see that this world is not all there is and that there is nothing to fear because we stand with God. It's not just moms, like I said, it's grandmoms, it's aunts. It's not just your own children. It doesn't even have to be a blood relationship. I know many young ladies who work with Lisa, and I get to brag on her for a moment, but they tell her stuff. One of them sent her a happy Mother's Day wish this morning. It doesn't even have to be a biological mom, but you can fill that role in someone's life. I see so much talk about how women need to be empowered. And I heard somebody say, thank the goddess. And I'm like, ladies, you don't need to give in to that garbage because God has already entrusted you with probably the greatest power there is and the greatest amount of influence and importance. They're really trying to take it away from you, not give it to you. Don't be afraid to stand in the face of our society and say, no, not this child. Not one more. You might risk some things to say that, and it will require faith, but you have the ability to see what no one else can in some children. And you can have the influence on that child that probably no one else can. Because that nurturing sense and that power that God has given you in this world. That's who God made you to be. That's who He wants you to be. Because of that, we honor you today and we stand with you and we pray for you. And most of all, we thank God for you. We do. We thank God for you.